He holds a special place in the history of literature. He wasn't renowned in academia, but he contributed more words to the English vocabulary than some proficient professors and philosophers. While many writers might have broken barriers to fame, none have the living reputation William Shakespeare has. To be or not to be? That is the question. Shakespeare was indeed not just for his era, but for all time. His private life. He was the son of John Shakespeare and Mary Arden, born on April 23, 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon. His father made a living as a tanner and a glover while trading wool and grain occasionally. The Shakespeares had a comfortable life, especially with John climbing some ladder of societal power when he served in various offices, including High Bailiff, a post similar to a mayor in his city. Things started going haywire when John's fortune started declining, for reasons unknown, but gracefully it was sustained by his wife's property's mortgages. It is not well known, but it is suspected that William was educated at the King Edward VI Grammar School in Stratford, where he must have learned how to read and write in English, Latin, and Greek. His knowledge of ancient classics was also vast, reflected in many of his plays and poems. His teenage years had no major event, and by 18 years he married Anne Hathaway, who was then 26 years of age, in what he described as a shotgun wedding. Their first child, Susanna, came the following May, and their twins, Hamlet and Judith, were born in 1585. Shakespeare didn't have any interesting features in his life until 1592. For all we care, he might have taught at a school within the years before. What was important to know was that he'd left his family back home to pursue something significant with his life, and that would be the most successful literary career the world would ever experience. So he could restore the fortunes his family had. The reason for leaving his family behind is not known to many. There are several questions regarding this. It was rumoured but never confirmed that he once had an affair with a pretty young lady in London. Others rumoured about his sexuality, especially after he wrote his sonnets with the characterization of a young man who seemed to comfort the poet's speaker and cause him emotional pain through jealousy, as he accused his character of engaging with other writers. It becomes more intense and perhaps a message misread by people, when the poet becomes unhappy after his handsome young friend left with a dark beauty from whom he had enjoyed sexual favors. The poem gave heterosexual meaning to many, and the suspicion continued, especially when his works, including the romances between Romeo and Juliet, Orlando and Rosalind, Henry V and Catherine of France, and many others, frequently and warmly portray heterosexuality in a positive light. His only son died when he was only 11 in 1596. William Shakespeare received the old family home in Henley Street, which was then partially leased to tenants as his inheritance from his father after his death in 1601. He furthered his investment risks by acquiring more lands in Stratford, such as the 107 acres in 1602, increasing his net worth. His career. Shakespeare moved to London to begin his apprenticeship as an actor. It is unknown when he developed his passion for theatre and writing, but his foundation in Greek and Roman works might have contributed to it. A plague had set in at that time, limiting the openings of theatre and limiting his experience for the next 2 years, of which he must have worked for his patron Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton, to whom he dedicated his first 2 poems, Venus and Adonis in 1593, and The Rape of Lucery in 1594. In 1594, he joined Lord Chamberlain's company of actors, the most popular of the companies acting at court. He built influence amongst the people, and by 1599, Shakespeare joined a group of Chamberlain's men, which would later change to the King's Men after James I ascended the throne in 1603, a group that would establish a corporation to construct and run a new theatre, the Globe, which would become the most well-known theatre of its day. A few years later, he bought his new place home in Stratford. Becoming a shareholder of the Chamberlain, he became a full-time professional dramatist in his theatre to build great financial success. Shakespeare might have been known for his stage play performance, but his heart was set on poetry. He composed his sonnets between 1593 and 1601, although it wasn't until 1609 that it was published. The Sonnets of Shakespeare consists of 154 sonnets written in 3 quatrains and a couplet, a literary style now known as a Shakespearean. His sonnet was a message addressed to people he felt passionate about. The first 126 sonnets were to a dear friend, who he described as noble and handsome. The last pages were dedicated to a mysterious dark lady he loves. His sonnet describes the poetry that preserves love and beauty against the inescapable passage of time. He wasn't just a brilliant writer, he was creative and innovative with words. Shakespeare created thousands of new words for use in his plays and works. frequently fusing or twisting Latin, French, and indigenous sources, many of which are used in English and can be found in dictionaries. Most of his early plays were comedies and histories, such as Henry VI and The Comedy of Errors, and these are now regarded as some of the best in their respective categories. In 1596, Shakespeare wrote a tragedy enjoyed till today, a genre entirely different from his usual plays. Until around 1608, Shakespeare primarily produced tragedies, among them some of the best works ever written in the English language, such as Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. In the latter part of his career, he worked with other playwrights to create tragic comedies, often known as romances. It is challenging to identify the definitive text because of the publication techniques of the era, and the fact that playwrights wrote intending to generate money, rather than conserve their plays. Shakespeare's plays weren't all published during his lifetime, just roughly half of them were. Shakespeare's plays were not collected into one volume until 1623, when his work was publicized. Altogether, Shakespeare's works include 38 plays, 2 narrative poems, 154 sonnets, and various other poems. His literary debt. An unveiling comes when it is found that this great writer might not be all that mighty in truth. The existence of an original play manuscript by Shakespeare has not been found, and this is because many of his works have the influence and contributions of a group of actors and friends like Raphael Holinshead, Plautus, the poet Ovid, Christopher Marlowe, and a few others. His most obvious debt was to Raphael Holinshead, whose chronicles provided plot inspiration for several plays, notably Macbeth and King Lear. His playwright reputation. Shakespeare wasn't the most well-known playwright of his time as opposed to the popularity of his works to this day. Shakespeare's contemporaries, Ben Jonson, Britain's first poet laureate, and Christopher Marlowe were both seen as having greater value than the man whose renown has subsequently surpassed both of his rivals. It wasn't until the late 18th century that Shakespeare started to gain recognition as Britain's top dramatist. By the end of the 19th century, his reputation had become well established, thanks to the attention he attracted with his sensibility and narrative. Shakespeare is currently the most studied and performed dramatist in the Western world, a resounding endorsement of Bard's storytelling prowess and universality. Death and retirement. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. As You Like It, Act 2, Scene 7. Shakespeare felt he had achieved the goal he'd ventured to London to create, financial stability for himself and his family. He retired to Stratford about 1613, when he was 49 years old, and he passed away there 3 years later, on April 23, 1616, at the age of 52. Shakespeare's personal life is only partially documented. He signed his will, stating that he was in excellent health within a month of his passing. Shakespeare's eldest daughter, Susanna, received most of his substantial assets and left his second-best bed to his wife, according to his testament. If you like this biography, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to be amongst the first to know when we release a new video. Here are more videos for you to watch. See you in one of the next videos.